Well, in terms of long dead emperors, I feel like we're kind of hitting that bar, right? Where it's like, who do you compare him to? Probably more Caligula at this point. George Washington. Okay. Aren't you patriotic? I will say this. Yeah, it's funny because when you said that, my mind went to like one of the things with Washington, right? Is he ended up using martial law to put down a rebellion, whether rightfully or wrongfully. But I do think about that with Trump a lot because he's demonstrated he's not beyond those kind of tactics when it comes to any demonstration at this point.
Now recording.
Now, let's see, I have one of the better styles. Right? Could be. I don't know too much about the George Washington side, but I do agree with you in the sense that like we shouldn't aggrandize it, right? Like he's not Doctor Evil, you know. He's not. just two quick points. One, for the floor, just be careful not to credit or debit are not the same thing as money, right? Money is just a way of discussing Newman at this point, and in part voluptus, right? Um, I had a second point, but I forgot it. Oh yeah. And then when we after we read the paragraph, we'll talk about the mining and the difference in the despotic versus capital, just in the general sense of you know how kind of deterritorialization and decoding are playing into that.
So the body of without organs would also be the despotic as opposed to being the territorial, right? Yeah, but the BWO before he was identified with the Earth, right? The territorial or the socius. Okay, but then okay, so there is a difference between the despotic BWO and the are they the same thing? Okay. So basically, you're saying that the BWO doesn't really change, right, as it goes from the territorial, Earth to the despotic. Yeah, 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 okay, the socius, yeah. So in other words, the socius changes, but the BWO doesn't change, right? It remains the same BWO, whether it's the territorial or the despotic or the capitalist. The BWO doesn't change through all these different, uh, you know, transformations. Yeah, thanks. It does help. And now, where's the BWO in this kind of what you just described?
What's the question? What about him? No. The conditions of the syntheses are different. So it's like for Deleuze and Guattari, it's the unconscious versus the preconscious there.
Okay. So the does the BWO change with the change of every socius that changes from the territorial to the despotic to the capitalist? It,
Y-
it would be that the BWO remains pretty much the same, or are they? It sounds like they're talking about the BWO as being different with each stage of this transformation from one despotic, from the despotic to the capitalist or something like that.
Uh, yes and no, it changes. So no, in the sense that a BWO is a BWO, and the conditions of production um, don't become that of social production insofar as you're dealing with a BWO, right? So that's the no. The yes is that the relationship between um, the two bodies is changing, right? So there's a few ways this changes. For instance, the first two socii are very close and intimate to the BWO, whereas capital will not be because it'll become an absolute limit, which we'll deal with when we get there. Um, but basically, the relationship is kind of what you want to focus on there because what what's produced in one is produced in the other in a manner of speaking. They mutually invest in each other, they affect each other, and so that when social productions conditions shift this dramatically, it does impact the BWO, even though the BWO, um, it's not like the Earth has become despotic, right? It remains the BWO, but it can take on new paranoiac functions. It can take on new schizophrenic functions.
Thanks.
I guess I just say with these what we're going over. Um, just had a, sure. What I was just gonna say is like if you notice, especially in this last paragraph, Like they're going through all three syntheses in this paragraph. They've underlined them in the previous paragraph. They're going over the falling back on production. So, right, is the main theme going through this right now is how social production is shifted and what the tension is between the earth and the despotic, right? Because it's a functional tension, very true to Freud in that sense. Um, so that's what they're kind of hitting on here. And that's really important because how the syntheses are shifting and how they relate to the previous uses of the syntheses with the earth, right? Especially insofar as there's now a transcendent um, usage going on now, right? We can finally talk about that. Um, that's basically the big meat of how to understand the despotic socius, right? How it relates to the earth, but also how it does what it's doing through the syntheses.
Would you say that the despotic is a kind of has a kind of a transcendent function in relation to the earth? And
The, oh, go ahead. Finish your question.
yeah, so there's the despotic has a kind of a transcendent function in relation to the earth.
So, so whenever a synthesis is used transcendently, right? That is a transcendent use of the synthesis. If I remember correctly, I believe black is discussed in the primitive. Um, at the same time, what's unique about the despotic, right? So this point about the transcendent unity, the discussion of Asiatic culture to discuss the people close to the earth versus the state, right? And the functionality between that kind of that difference, right? They're outlining how, again, how there's a tension between the two soci we've
Mm-hmm.
discussed, and how there is now an added element, right? It's almost not quite compensatory, but you can kind of think of it that way in a manner of speaking. So basically, right, the despot is the socius, and the despot is included in a transcendent unity called the state, right? And so there's kind of two levels to that in a manner of speaking, right? Especially because the state is this kind of pyramid um, collecting everything, right? Collecting
Mm-hmm.
the bourgeois and collecting the despot and collecting the people of the earth and so forth. Um, so that's where you're getting the transcendent unity. And if you notice, like where they're talking about some of this use of inscription, right? That's how you're getting the sense of like a transcendent disjunction, right? The double bind, as they'll go on to explain.
Yeah. And I think this, I'm just going to dive into the next paragraph because it does bring it back. Because the thing we were talking about with the larger state, with the socius, is that it aggregates towns, it aggregates these individual cities, towns, villages, groups, whatever it may be, of the primitive territorial machine. This is not, again, a wholesale pop and we're over. There's a thing happening as this grows. And again, this is anthropological. You can go back and actually read some amazing stories of how this happened and what sort of was in. But to read. As for these sub-aggregates themselves, the primitive territorial machines, they are the concrete itself, the concrete base and beginning. But their segments here enter into relationships corresponding to the essence. They assume precisely this form of bricks that ensures their integration into the higher unity, and their distributive operation consonant with the great collective designs of this same unity. Major work projects, extortion of surplus value, tributes, generalized servitude. Two inscriptions coexist in the imperial formation and mutually adjust insofar as the one is imbricated into the other, but the new inscription cements the whole and brings producers and products into relations with itself. Do not need to speak the same language. The imperial inscription countersects all the alliances and filiations, prolongs them, makes them converge into a direct filiation of the despot with the deity, and the new alliance of the despot with the people. All the coded flows of the primitive machine are now forced into a bottleneck where the despotic machine overcodes them. Overcoding is the operation that constitutes the essence of the state, and that measures both its continuity and its break with the previous formations. The dread of flows of desire that would resist coding, but also the establishment of a new inscription that overcodes, and that makes desire into the property of the sovereign, even though he be the death instinct itself. The castes are inseparable from this overcoding and imply the existence of dominant classes that do not manifest themselves as classes, but are merged with the state apparatus. Who is able to touch the full body of the sovereign? Here we have a problem of castes. It is overcoding that impoverishes the earth for the benefit of the territorialized full body, and that on this full body renders the movement of the dead infinite. It is a measure of Nietzsche's force to have stressed the importance of such a movement that begins with the founders of states, these artists with a look of bronze, creating an oppressive and remorseless machine, erecting before any perspective of liberation an ironclad impossibility. This infinitivation cannot be understood exactly as Nietzsche would have it, that is, as a consequence of an interplay of ancestors, profound genealogies, and extended filiations. Rather, when these are short-circuited, abducted by the new alliance and direct filiation, then the ancestor, the master of the mobile and finite blocks, finds himself dismissed by the deity, the immobile organizer of bricks of their infinite circuit. There's a lot said. Again, as we make this move, it is just very important, as Jack was talking about, and as I was trying to say, that it's not that we have suddenly a state. It's that the interaction of these things and how the state interacts with towns, with villages, with small subgroups that are already pretty much there, that are already in this primitive territorial machine, how it co-opts them is not simply through sort of just this brute takeover, but instead the way that it interacts through these elements, through how recording is done, through how production is served, and how these things play is the point. Countersecting alliances and filiations, prolonging them, converging them. Specifically, there's a couple terms that are really important in here. One of them is, obviously in italics, is overcoding. When we talk about desire being coded, we're talking about the earth socius, for example. Desire emerges and immediately is basically appropriated. And it's appropriated particularly in line with the recordings of the earth. It is matching it. You are hunting. You are out doing your thing. You are in a village doing various. You can't do certain things, not because there's a prohibition necessarily, but because the way that your affirmative actions work are already coded. You are coded to seek out people who you aren't related with, to form alliances. You aren't coded not to do things, not so much a not as much as it is a positive, this continuous force, already written, in line, coded. The state comes in and the act of overcoding comes. Now again, we still have those terrifying flows of desire that would resist it, but with this, we have a new thing that happens, a new inscription that overcodes, that makes desire into the property of the sovereign. This shifts things. Suddenly the castes are really inseparable from this overcoding, and it's not really a class system, even though we can look back and assign it to that, just like we can look back and assign incest to incest prohibitions, or weren't allowed to do these things when you were, it's like, no, there's not that, it's not how it worked. It wasn't that you're prohibited, it's that you were positively moving. Castes in this way, which we would call classes, you would have your, the landed class, the rich people here, poor people here, you see those things, but it's not really that. There's dominant classes, but they're not classes because they're merged within the state apparatus. This changes how these elements play together. Who is able to touch the full body of the sovereign? Here we have the problem of caste, overcoating that impoverishes the earth for the benefits of this full body, and on this full body renders the movement of debt infinite. Again, to talk about money, to talk about how these things work, this is the movement that starts happening that shifts us away from what was and how desire was being functioned and coded, now being overcoded through this process of inscription. And suddenly groups of people that are built into the state at different levels, they're part of this overcoding. They're inseparable from it. Again, not determined, not I chose Steve and he's a rich guy, but instead part of the state apparatus and how it operates overall. Because we're going to be getting into barbarian imperial representation, where we talk again about how these castes come to be, how classes come to be, how incest is prohibited or allowed, and again, how desire actually makes these things happen. Look back from our position, say, oh, look, you're not allowed to do these things, or you had to do these things. Like, yes, but those things you're talking about are in our terms of that. You didn't do those things didn't happen, doesn't mean they were prohibited. Those things did happen. It doesn't mean they were required or that they were forced. Not really same way of discussing things as we ought to be doing, which is talking about how desire changes into these forms and how production is co-opted. So we can actually see how the sort of the machinery of these elements work. But I leave it open for comments. Jack, you got anything? I know you take a more hard line on the specificities around desire, and it's good.
I mean, I don't know about hardline. I just try to read it through the syntheses.
No, I know. That's what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I'd offer is like, so if you notice this first bit, right, like they're going through the sub-aggregates, right? So they're talking about the connective synthesis and how, um, like it gets into the difference between partial objects or like social machines in a general sense, and the way they kind of become aggregates through lack, right? And that's getting at just like they say the primitive machine, right? What's kind of happening here is that's getting put into relationship with how the despotic works with those. I don't want to call them groupings because they use that term for something else, for those kind of aggregates, right? The second step they're making is they're connecting that to how the inscription is changing. So notice they're not saying it's changed so that it's done away with the use of coding and all that, right? Like Brooks was saying. So the codification's still there. The inscriptions, right, the kind of memory is still there, as Deleuze and Guattari have gone over, right? The filiations get connected to the new filiations, right? Or I'm sorry, the extended filiations, and the alliances get connected to the new alliances, right? Merging the two syntheses there quite cleverly. So in that sense, right, codification is getting at, usually when I explain it, I just kind of shorthand it to like semiotics, right? So it's signifiers, right? It's like Lacan or Derrida perhaps, but I'll leave that to somebody else to explore. Um, the, the critical thing is that the way codes function, right, is it's taking that use of the inscription through the filiate of the alliant. It's doing that semiotic work of marking, right, of marking on the social body, on the earth, and so forth. And in that sense, it's concrete in a semiotic way, whereas overcoding to me is more like Saussure, where you're dealing with the signifieds, the kind of mental side of semiotics, or a sign. And you can kind of see that in the sense that the overcoding is above, right? Just like with money, with accounting, there's a kind of mental function being used, right? So that Newman is functioning in that sense. And that's where you start getting this abstract language and all of that.
Love it. we have two options. We can spend time going back over this section. We can move on to the next section. And that's it. Or we could take a break and just do the hour today and move on next week and do a full 2 hours starting with the next section. You know, I'm always up for it.
I'd just like to ask about the phrase makes desire into the property of the sovereign.
Mhm.
Does that sort of mean that the whole driving system of everything that's going on in this socius is ultimately driven by the sovereign? Is that what it means?
Driven by the sovereign is I would be very hesitant to say it that way. Ascribed to the sovereign, yes.
Okay.
Because
Okay,
again,
thanks.
it falls back on is the big phrasing in that one, because it's the sovereign or the state or the earth or capital don't produce fuck in anything. Like, they don't do shit. They're a recording service that seems to fall back on. And this is they spend so much time on sort of the personal version of this. You fall back on production of the desiring machines that produce you. You do this. We all do this. If you've ever said to yourself, "Oh fuck, I'm hungry," you're not. There's no you. There's no hungry. That's not how that works in any capacity. But the sensations and the intensities around hunger, you have decided and been told that means that you're hungry. And so you say, I am hungry. So you fall back on that production in the same way that the despot, all desire is the despot's. The despot has fallen back on. He has all desire, all production, everything is through him. All desire flows through him. Everything comes through him. And that is a falling back on, not a produced.
Okay. I think that's what I was trying to express. Great, thanks.
If we have time, can we maybe read this paragraph a little closer?
We have the time.
Okay.
Please go for it. I'm going to pop up the translation and grab some Holland, because I agree with you. I think it's worth going through, because the next bit when we start moving through is about representation within the despot and how it operates, and it is a significant change, and I think it is worth its own discussion, because I think we're not going to discuss representation in the next 20 minutes if we talk about this. So I think let's do the next hour. We'll do this paragraph and then go back over the rest of this section, just to make sure everyone's clear on it. That sounds good to everybody. Great to me. So for people to tell me that I'm wrong, so I won't listen. Sounded terrible.
I'm fine with reviewing.
Let's do it. Go for it, Jack.
Okay. So just going back to so what I was just saying largely gets at this first half. Integration, the higher unity, right? So this is about how, so notice the use of integration, right? The use of codes is a kind of material for overcoding, right? So it's just like in a sign, the signifier and signified still have a relationship. You know, putting aside like post-structuralism for a minute, they still have a relationship, right? And in this sense, there's a kind of, it's almost an absorption, right? The signified uses some of that material, the signifier, to do what it's doing, right? It builds upon it, right? Like a brick. And that's kind of the theme as we're going through like pieces and fragments, right? The One of the marks of the despotic is that it builds over the earth, right? Quite literally and quite productively, and quite necessarily, right? So in a manner of speaking, it subdues the earth, but it doesn't try to negate it. It tries to kind of rework it. So two inscriptions coexist in the imperial formation, right? This is what we're talking about with like signifiers and the signifieds, but also, taking a step back from that, this general use of the filiative and the alliant versus the extended filiative and the new alliant under the despot. Right? Mutually adjust right? So they change together. Insofar as the one is imbricated in the other, imbricating is like tiles on a roof, they layer over each other, right? Again with the over theme. But the new inscription, so overcoding, cements the whole and brings producers and products into relations with itself. They do not need to speak the same language. So, right, the earth and the despotic are being, the two inscriptions are kind of brought together in this way. And it's not about how well they speak the same language, it's that the relationship between the two happens and the transcendent unity, I don't want to say prevails here, but notice the work it's doing, right? And notice how it's doing that work. I'll go a little bit further and we can pause. The imperial inscription countersets all the alliances and affiliations, prolongs them, made them converge into the direct affiliation, the despot with the deity, and the new alliance of the despot with the people. So this is the trick, right? It countersects. So it's like lines on a grid being brought into new relationships, right? Countersection, intersection, so forth, right? So in that sense, the the alliances and affiliations of the earth are prolonged, right? So the debts are prolonged. They're kind of given life, so to speak, right? They remain living, and they're converged, so they're kind of merged, right, into the direct affiliation of the despot with the deity, right? Because it's either the despot or his god, and the new alliance of the despot with the people. So there's this again with this kind of like absorption almost, right? Those alliances, those debts, those affiliations are both countersected and almost absorbed into how overcoding's working, right? So you have a kind of substantiation there, so that the transcendent still has a relationship to all of this, right? It still has a relationship to, the earth syntheses and so forth, and it needs that. It's also going to do something on top of that, that kind of, I don't want to say overrides it, right? But in a manner of speaking, it almost does, right? In the sense that overriding would be taking like overcoding here. I give the floor to somebody else here.
Yeah. So is that that transcendent usage is of the synthesis? Of the first synthesis, right? Because on page 198 it says that the body of the despot is a connective synthesis of the old alliances with the new, right? And so the transcendent or misuse of the synthesis occurs in the first, synthesis, right? The connective synthesis.
So, insofar as the earth uses lack, yes. Insofar as the despot uses, yeah. Insofar as the earth uses lack, yes. Insofar as the despotic uses double binds, right? No, because the despot is using a different transcendent usage. So you have two to keep track of here. And in the net socius, you'll have three. So the gifts keep on giving.
Also, the reason I was asking about the body without organs is because, he's associating the despot with the body. Does that mean the body without organs? In this case, he's talking about the body of the despot is the connective synthesis. And also on go back to the body without organs section on page 10, he's talking about, he says the body of the earth, that of the tyrant or capital, right? The full body that functions as a socius. And then the next paragraph, he says, capital is indeed the body without organs of the capitalist. That's why I was confused that, about the body without organs. Is it changed every time it goes through these different stages?
It's particular, and again, some of this is on the translator, like a lot of things. The phrasing, the full body without organs, versus the body without organs is a different beast. It's not meant to be lightly, and it is one of the reasons it becomes very, very confusing. The full body without organs is produced as anti-production. To say, it intervenes within the process as such for the sole purpose of rejecting any attempt to impose on it any sort of triangulation, implying that it was produced by parents. When we talk about the full body of the capitalist, then capital is the element, the written surface of the full body of the capitalist. The full body of the despot, and like the way that these things operate, their language is very particular here, and it does get to be confusing, especially in the English translation of trying to find a very specific part of what we're talking about. No fun. It is one of the things that makes it very, very.
Would it be correct to identify the body without organs as the earth? As the earth, like Spinoza's, nature, substance, God.
Kind of, where you want to be careful. It goes back to one of your earlier questions, right? So the body without organs is different than the socius. The same way social production is different than desired production, right? Even though there's a relationship between them, and to one of your points, right? They're substantively consistent. All of it is still production, right? The difference is like I would focus on how they're using the word body versus taking body to mean the body without organs and vice versa, right? Because the body without organs and the socius are both bodies here. And it's in that sense that there's a difference in the conditions for those bodies, what those two bodies do, right? Because the socius is going to be a kind of body dealing with determinate conditions, whereas the body without organs is going to be a kind of body dealing with indeterminate conditions, if you like.
So when they use the body without organs, you could say that that never really changes definitionally in these three different kinds of socius, right? Yeah, no matter what socius it's in, the body without organs is not is fundamental. It never really changes. Maybe the relationship between them and between the socius and them is different, but the body without organs is this, is defined the same way throughout these different stages. Would that be correct?
I think so, right? So it's still going to be the surface of inscription, as Brooks noted. It's going to be like your master, the disjunctive syllogism, and so forth. But yeah, to your point, like the relationship's going to change between it and the socius because obviously with capital, right, it's going to take on the role of the absolute limit, for instance. So,
But when they say, yeah, so that that line where they say on page 10, the capital is indeed the body without organs, just means that that from a perspective of from a certain perspective, you could understand the capital as a kind of like a body without organs
Well,
from the perspective. Yeah.
so I'm gonna throw things out there because this is one of those really hard sort of minor differences when we talk about the body without organs versus the full body. The full body is a thing they're going to use a lot, and as we get further in the book, it's going like even in the next section, the full body of the despot versus the body of the despot. Like there's the phrase "full" is it's important to me. I think a lot of their language here is they're using it very descriptively. It is somewhat poetic, but it's not really meant to be taken as metaphor kind of thing. When we talk about the full body, it is full. It's not, it doesn't mean the entire body, which in English, like I get the full picture. That's not the word they're using here. They're using full like fatty or like I've the balloon is full of like it's full of, in this case, in the case of the body without organs, it's full of intensities. It's the use of full and the division is the body without organs, generally speaking. When we talk about the body without organs, we're talking about sort of this surface that isn't really a structure itself, but is really disconnected from a lot of these things. It is a surface of organization. It's a framework. It's this really sort of interesting psychological thing that plays. When we talk about the full body, we're talking about a BWO that has actually moved itself beyond being a normal or being a BWO and is now actually sort of at the end of its potential state. It is, I don't know how to put this. How to put it. When we talk about the BWO, often, when we talk about it, we're talking about something that is very often defined by external forces and describing on it. BWO is basically constantly being fucked with and built and reorganized and fucked with by a ton of different stuff. The intensities recorded on its surface reach a point at some point where they are the full body. The full body is full of intensities. At this point, other shit isn't really changing it anymore. It's no longer defined by external forces. It's beyond that. The Earth as the full body, it is not a BWO for this reason. There's a reason they use the term the socius. The Earth is not defined by external shit anymore. It is a full body. It has all of the intensities and all the things happening that make it. The full body of the despot is no longer externally defined in any capacity or influence. That's not how it works. It instead falls back on all things. It is, supreme is the wrong word, but it is important to understand how it contrasts the full body with the body. The full body of the capitalist is not like Steve Jobs. It's not Elon Musk. It's not full body of the capitalist. It's instead this space where the capitalist, as the thing that is the element of capital, reaches that sort of point where it is full. It's no longer defined externally. It's a different setup. If that makes sense. So it's full body here is what's really, really important. And it is very complicated to talk about because it starts getting into and ultimately can only be really understood after reading not just this, but reading all their secondary literature and also Thousand Plateaus, where they go fully into the full body as an important element and definition around. But again, it's the change in how the BWO operates to become a full BWO rather than just being a BWO.
Does this relate to the sovereign, a detached object jumped outside of the chain?
Yes.
That...
Yes, very much. Because again, when things are no longer externally determined, now we have the despot who is the they're making a comment there, the master signifier, and we'll get into that in next week. But when things have moved into a position where they're no longer externally determined, but instead are almost this this thing that is operating itself purely through its own capacities and intensities. This is where meaning comes. This all this stuff. It's not being structured externally. This shifts the interaction we have with the element or with the things. And again, the BWO, the Earth socius, the full body of the Earth, the full body of the despot, isn't really being recorded on anymore. It has fallen back on and appropriated all production for itself. It's not shifting itself. It is full of intensities. This is not, by the way, an easy thing. I may be wrong on this. This has been a thing I've been spending a lot of time on and off over the course of years to try to figure out, because it is the way that the socius and the BWO and the full body and all these things are interchanged in the English text is troubling because it's used a little bit more haphazardly. And I do think full is a confusing language in English because I think it has a handful of meanings beyond what they originally intended. Hey, that's just me. So as we sort of move around and talk about these things, it's important to sort of consider that they do mean very different things, even though full body and body sound like they might be pointing to the same thing.
Thanks.
Read it.
Go for
To
it.
add to that, this is just how I read it, but when I see a full body, I take that to mean the falling back on production,
Yes.
right? So it's, basically what you're doing, right, is you're in a manner of speaking, you're kind of switching perspectives so that when you deal with the falling back on production, it's as though you're dealing with production from a kind of perspective of the BWO or of the socius, right? As though it's the conditions of production, right?
So just go back to the beginning of the description of the full body without organs.
Wait, JK, you just jogged my memory. I don't mean to interrupt you. Before you do that, the part you're reading, I just wanted to point out that I believe where you're drawing from, it's worth bearing in mind that at that point in the book, they're making a parallelism between the socius and the BWO to explain the BWO. So it's important to have that context that they're explaining the socius there to explain the BWO by way of parallel. Okay, go ahead.
So basically, it's a conflict between the BWO and design production, and the socius is also in conflict with design production. So there's three, major players here, right? BWO, the socius, and design production.
I want to add social production if you slice it that way. But
Yeah, social production, yeah, yes, or socius, right? The same thing.
well, it's this the socius and the social production go together, as do the BWO and desired production, right? Go ahead, Brooks.
So you're saying that design production is on the side of the BWO?
It's pre-BWO or within the like around it. The BWO is part of design production.
Because at the beginning of on chapter 2, page 9, they talk about the
Wait, chapter 2, page 9, or 1.2, page 9?
Page 9 would be
You're on
1.2.
1.2 on page 9? Okay.
because they're talking about the conflict between the BWO and desiring machines.
Yes.
Right.
Uh,
What about it?
the desiring machines, so desiring machines disconnect. They like that happy day, they're connecting. BWO slides between them, stops them. Like there's interactions here, but the recording, the intensity of the thing is part of the recording that the BWO is created by. Desiring machines go, holy fuck, there's that. I know that intensity. That intensity is great. So it wants, like desiring machines want to experience like literal same, like, holy shit, that's the thing. I want that thing. But it can't. It can't experience intensity or connect with intensity. You can connect with things. So the BWO has this strained relationship with desiring machines, and that it is produced by them, can't connect with them, and also interrupts them, but is also desired by them. Thus the sort of paranoiac machine and other elements that sort of come to be in that, the way that these things interact and again produce intensities that are also recorded in and of themselves. That is the body without organs. The full body operates differently. The full body, to just page 154, just to go back slightly, the full body has one, an enchanted surface of inscription, this fantastic law or apparent objective movement. Different than the BWO. The BWO doesn't have that sort of, it is a place of inscription, but it's not magically so. It's inscribed upon by sort of experience connections and intensities. But the full body of the thing, it seems like it is directing it. It is this odd element. It's the thing. At the same time, it also has the ability to be this quasi-cause. So not only is it this place, this enchanted service of magical inscription where this apparent objective movement happens. It seems to be of its own will. It seems to be of its own thing. BW doesn't have this. But also at the same time, it is the quasi-cause, which is why it's the full body without organs. It seems like all of these things are being done in it. It seems like the despot is controlling everything. To use the Great Wall of China as an example, Kafka's story, I think, does nail it, and I think the actual tales of how it got produced isn't wildly off. This didn't happen in like 2 years. Great Wall of China took a while. In fact, I think it took a handful of emperors to do it. And we think of, and we talk of, or even at the time, emperors who oversaw this as if they were steadfastly resolute and always in control, and always, it's insane as a concept. Many people ruled and many people oversaw. The emperor didn't know almost anything that was happening necessarily. Why would he have? Like we have ascribed this magical recording service to the full body of the despot through the emperor, or the full body of blank. It didn't. Instead, the reality is most emperors would be incredibly demoralized because you could do, I think in Kafka's story, he has it, it's a kilometer every 5 years of the wall. I think is about right. That sucks. Like, I don't think I could enjoy knowing my entire life would go by. I'd see a handful of kilometers done and then die. But we have ascribed this. Yes, they oversaw the construction. They knew it was happening. They did so well. We had the great man theory of everything. They are, on the one hand, the enchanted service of inscription that all is done through the apparent objective movement. They know what needs to be done. They stand above. They also are the quasi-cause. They're the cause of all of those things. So they're on both sides. It's not content to inscribe things. It must act as if it also produced them. It is necessary the connections reappear in a form compatible with the inscribed disjunctions, even if they react in turn on the form of those disjunctions themselves. So this is the difference between the full body and the body without organ.
The full body is associated with the social production then, right?
Yes.
I'm not sure about that part. I think
It's a safe line. It's not 100%, but it's better. Go ahead, Jack. Go.
Well, I would say rather than slicing it by one's the full body, one's not, right? Both of them can function as falling back on production, right? And so in that sense, like the use of disjunctions on connections and so forth, right? Both of them will do that. It's just that if you notice, the BWO is not going to do that through alliance affiliation.
Correct.
Right. So that's one of your hallmark differences.
Yeah, and they end up getting close, but again, I'm hesitant to say that the BWO inscribes. Like that's I think the difference here. Enchanted surface of inscription that the full body has, to me, is the added layer, because it's not so much that it's also inscribing magically the rules and laws. Like they come out of nowhere. We don't know what happens. At the same time, it has to produce the thing it's inscribing. So it's kind of it gets everything. It's why it's really unique and why they're sort of splitting it out. This is the break of these things, and this is why the full body of the earth, the complete full body, that transverses indivisible distance, passes through all singularities, all the intensities of a synthesis, shifts and reproduces itself. The full body of the earth does all of these things. The full body of the despot does all of these things. There's the difference. You wouldn't say like the full body of the neighborhood dog. Not really how that works. particular functioning in society and social order. I don't know, Jack, you tell me, would you ever say like the full body of Brooks? That feels weird language.
Well, I'm really not sure. I mean, it really kind of if full is just a way of talking about the BW or the socius falling back on production,
And the magical inscription.
go through that. Yeah. I don't know. For me, inscription is just a way of getting at how the second synthesis functions. But if you want to say inscription is only done in social production,
That's not what I'm saying.
uh, well, I think you kind of have to, right?
No, because there's emergent inscription, which you would say, I think just generally emergent inscription is what's happening on the BWO. There is no sort of understanding of things that design machines have. They're just connecting and disconnecting. Inscription happens on the BWO. This is much more emergent, even if it's influenced in some capacity. It's still emergent. Versus within the full body of the Earth, difference being that the Earth sets the rules, even though it didn't. But it's perceived as setting the rule, but it didn't set the rule. It's perceived as owning all production and having created all things. The different setup than
Yeah, going back to inscription. This is page 11. But the essential thing is the establishment of an enchanted recording or inscribing surface that aggregates to itself all the productive forces and all the organs of production, and that acts as a quasi-cause by communicating the apparent movement or the fetish to them. And this is in reference to desiring production, because they're going over the body without organs, the unproductive, and so forth. So that desiring machines seem to emanate from it in the impaired objective movement that establishes a relationship between the machines and the BWO. And then they go into miraculation, paranoiacization. Nobody else can coin a term there, but yeah. So if we're saying inscriptions common to the two, I think I'd agree with that. Based on what I just read.
Is anyone else going to disagree or agree or have questions? Hell of a thing. Again, not claiming I know necessarily at all. Like this is the hard shit. Go on.
I guess just return to the main point, right? So like again, the big difference is understanding how the socius and the BWO are involved in the same syntheses, even though the conditions for those syntheses differ, right? And yet there's a relationship between those two, right? That's kind of the heart of this discussion and kind of the heart of this section we've been reading. Arguably, this chapter, actually, chapter 3. I saw JK on mute, so bye, JK.
Nothing, JK? Oh, JK remuted. No, it's a fun one, JK. You're not alone. Like, this is one of those things that, like, literally feel free to, like, find other secondary sources that disagree with me and post them because I would love to see them. This stuff that I find, because they very particularly use full body in very specific ways. This is not just like a thing they added or like they're not saying like it's like penultimate when they really mean ultimate or some shit like that. Like they're very particular. Talk about the full body versus the body and how this surface of recording operates. And then ultimately how the full body, like the whole, the fullness, the totality of the thing operates differently. So it's a fascinating sort of shift. And again, it involves ATP hugely. It involves a lot of their other work in secondary. There's a Sorry, JK, I saw you were going to talk again.
Yeah, so you could say that could you say that the socius is referred to the full body, just like the BWO is like well, it is a body without organs, but does have a sense of fullness, right? The socius is a full body based on its inscriptions, but the full body without organs is the one that also records its inscriptions, right? The inscriptions are what makes the body with makes the organs, or does the production, right?
I'd still hesitate to try and slice it by which one's a full body and which one's not. The difference is that the difference between the two bodies, right? Because they're both bodies, is in their is really defined through their relationship to the syntheses and the conditions um, that those syntheses are comprised um, are mutually comprised with, right? So, like for instance, the BWO is not going to do inscription work through affiliation alliance. Socius is. However, the socius in affects or invests in the BWO by doing that, right? And the BWO affects or counter invests, if you like, in the socius by not doing that. And by doing it through the asignifying signs. Is it? I would have to really sit down and see if they ever discuss like a full body without organs. But at least insofar as like if we're just thinking about it through the falling back on, let's say Rabat Sir, they both do that.
Yeah. All right. If there's nothing else,
Would
go
you
for it,
think
JK.
of the body? Yeah, would you think of the body without organs as something like his idea of the virtual?
Yes, very much.
Okay, so it is an entity that is full of potential, like the
Yes.
virtual, right?
Oh, yes.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Oh, yes. It's it can be both really shitty and also wonderful. Like it's kind of an amazing the full conception of the BWO as you make your way through all of their works and his other writings, blah blah blah. Like it is a space of potential. That is very much what the intention here is. This is why the full body though is fascinating because it is a space. It is exceptional potential. It's filled with intensities and all sorts of things. Like there is an amazing amount of potential there, certainly, but how it operates is funny and odd and very specific about how it does these things, how it sort of plays back into the disjunction and plays back into the inscription. And this, again, we're talking about sort of the procedural nature of all of these elements and how they interplay, right?
I don't have anything on the virtual question, but sounds like we're getting close to closing. So just before we close, I just want to finish
Please.
going over the paragraph we left off in. So yeah, we hit overcoding, right? This is back on 199, right? And so overcoding is kind of the mark of the state, or right, like what's unique to it, measuring both its continuity and its break with the previous formation, the dread of flows of desire that would resist coding, right, which it has in common with the earth, but also the establishment of a new inscription that overcodes. Pausing there, right? So that's one of the key differences, right? The earth doesn't need to overcode. However, the despot will. And that mates desire into the property of the sovereign, even though he be the even though he be even though he be the death instinct itself, right? And that's just that language of like non-production and so forth coming through, right? Anti-production, because in that sense, right, the despotic, um, insofar as it does act like a kind of BWO, or play that role of body, right, is going to be non-productive. And so in that sense, right, this theme will come out more is that there's this way in which production is more and more taking on this relationship to anti-production as the socii develop. And you just see that highlighted there. So that with the point about property, right, there's kind of a sense in which property is related to something kind of anti-productive or death instinct like. Um, and in the way that property here is pertaining to the new alliance and the extended filiation, right? As are the overcodings. So then they go into caste. The castes are inseparable from this overcoding by the existence of dominant so-called classes that do not yet manifest themselves as classes, but are merged with the state apparatus. So right, caste is here, class becomes possible, class becomes potential, but does not come out, right? It doesn't get produced here. Who is able to touch the full body of the sovereign? Here we have a problem with the caste, right? So overcoding that impoverishes the earth for the benefit of the deterritorialized full body, and then on this full body renders the movement of the debt infinite. So in this sense, right, what overcoding does is it makes the debts infinite, right? It is a measure of Nietzsche's force to have stressed the importance of such a movement that begins with the founders of the states. So, right, this is to answer the question of what touches the body of the despot, what touches the full body, or this falling back on production. These artists with the look of bronze, not interested. This infinitivation cannot be understood exactly as Nietzsche would have it. So right there, right, what touches the body um, is going to be the infinite, right? So we have this sense of overcoding, kind of like mental, abstract ideas, so to speak, right? Accounting, and its relationship to the kind of material, concrete things, right? That are finite blots in relation to their infinitization, if I pronounce that correctly, right? And the thing that kind of seems to be touching that body is going to be the movement through the infinite, right? That is, as a consequence of the interplay of ancestors. So this is where they disagree with Nietzsche. Rather, when the genealogies and filiations are short-circuited, right? So that of the earth is short-circuited, abducted by the new alliance and direct filiation. Then the ancestor, the master of the mobile and finite blots, so right, we're talking about the earth here, finds himself dismissed by the deity, the immobile organizer of the Brits and of their infinite circuit. So to close my 5 minutes here or whatever, um, that's kind of the thing they're getting at here, right? Is that the um, the use of overcoding to make things infinite, right? It's not because of something that the Earth does. So it's not sourced by the Earth. Rather, it's acting upon the Earth to abduct, right? So it's like a kidnapping almost, to take what's of the Earth and to make it infinite, right? And that is kind of what they give us insofar as we're going to get an answer to what touches body of the despot, right? The socius. That's it for me.
All right. I think with that, I'm going to wind us down here. And we will next week continue into 3.7, Barbarian or Imperial Representation. Very much we'll continue with the conversation about the full body. Jump down into the Anti-Oedipus forum that we've got here on the Discord. I'll be posting a handful of links to help understand and stuff I've found and various things. It's a whole discussion, and I would love to have people help me sort that as well. So feel free to join in. And otherwise, I will see you all next